there are many different reasons why Rome would eventually win out over its competitors in the Mediterranean. What I want to focus on today are the cultural reasons. So my argument today is that Rome, in opposition to its enemies, developed a cultural system that allowed it to triumph over its enemies. This cultural system made it ideal for military competition against its major enemies. Okay? So, let's talk about this cultural system. And to understand this cultural system, I will compare and contrast it with the Greeks, who are also, who are basically the most culturally dominant people in this area at this time. Okay, so what do the Greeks believe in? Well, the Greeks believe in three things, okay? The Greek system. When I mean Greeks, I basically mean the Athenians, okay? Because the Athenians were the culturally dominant nation in the Greek world. All right, so what do the Greeks believe in, and how were the Romans different? Well, first thing to understand is that Greeks were culturally dominant. And so what happened was that Romans developed a lot of their cultural systems in opposition to the Greeks. Or they learned lessons from the Greeks. Okay, so think about, as an analogy, the relationship between China and Japan. A lot of Japanese cultural systems and values were developed in opposition to China and because of the lessons that the Japanese learned from Chinese history. Okay? So, let's talk about the Greek values and then what values the Romans developed in opposition to the Greeks. Okay? So the first value the Greeks developed was the idea of freedom. What is freedom? Freedom represents an egalitarian society in which everyone has the right to speak his mind. His, not hers, okay? His mind. So every citizen was considered equal. And that was the basis for Greek democracy. Everyone has the right to speak if you're a citizen. Okay? Now, what is the Roman counterpart? The Roman counterpart is what we call liberty. And they sound similar, but they're actually very different concepts. Freedom is the right to speak your mind, the right to live your life. Liberty is the respect for the laws, history, and traditions of your culture, because that's what enables you to be free. If we don't respect the laws, it'd be anarchy. Also, liberty means basically no king. Okay? We will never allow a king to rule us because he takes away our liberty. What's interesting for us is the modern Western concept is more aligned with the Romans than the Greeks. When we think of freedom and liberty, we think of the Roman idea, not the Greek idea, okay? So liberty. The Roman word for this is, of course, libertas. All right, so the second value of the Greeks is the idea of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is the pursuit of human flourishing, to be the best that you can be, to be better than your peers, and to win respect for your peers, to seek glory, to seek honor. So let's go back to last semester and think about Achilles in the epic, the Iliad. Achilles was in Troy not to win glory for the Greek people, but to win glory for himself. He was extremely selfish. He was extremely competitive. And he was so competitive that when he abandoned the battlefield, he basically asked his mother, Thetis, the goddess, to get Zeus, the high god, to favor the Trojans, okay? This is treason. This is sedition. And for the Greeks, this is good because what's important is to win eudaimonia. You, in order to achieve eudaimonia, can do anything because that's what matters. Okay? And the idea of eudaimonia, if you think about it, it's what led to Greek creativity because everyone saw society as a competition and they want to be the best. Okay? But if you think about it, it also leads to corruption and selfishness. Okay? So the Romans didn't like eudaimonia. But instead, their highest virtue was the idea of re publica. And this is where we get the word republic from. Re publica means for the greater good, for the public virtue. So what's important is not that you win glory for yourself, but to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, for the good of Rome. That's what made you a good person or the best person, to fight and die for Rome. Okay. And the third value for the Greeks that mattered was the idea of arete. Arete just means excellence. So even though Achilles was a jerk, the Greeks still admired him. Why? Because he was a great soldier. On the battlefield, he was fabulous. He was excellent. And therefore, he should be admired. Okay? The Romans didn't like this, okay? They didn't want people to outshine everyone else. So they prefer the concept of piety. Obedience, loyalty to your fathers, to Rome, to the gods. Piety is what mattered. The highest virtue in Rome is not arete, it is piety. And again, a lot of Roman values was developed in response to the Greeks, especially to the Athenians. Okay? Because remember, the Athenians in 480, they defeated the Persians. And the Athenians became basically an empire. And they were the dominant military force in the Mediterranean and the Aegean all of that time. But 80 years later, 400, they had been decimated. They had been destroyed. They fought against Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, and they lost. The Romans witnessed all this, right? Because they were just across from the Adriatic. They knew all this. And so they were determined not to repeat the mistakes of the Athenians. And that's why they developed a system in opposition to the Greeks, the Athenians. The Athenians had democracy. And it was common wisdom at that time that it was the democratic system that caused the collapse of the Athenian Empire. And in response, the Romans developed a system called the Republic. Now, there's a huge difference between democracy and republic. They sound the same. And in today's world, we use these two concepts interchangeably, okay? We say American democracy, we say American republic. It means the same thing, but back then, democracy and republic were two opposing systems. So let me give you an example to show you how different the system is. Okay? So democracy is basically one man, one vote. It encourages competition, it encourages debate, it encourages free thought. Republic is to be ruled by institutions, basically the Senate, okay? Institutions, by laws, and by history or tradition. All right, so what's the difference? All right, let's pretend that we're all going to go out for lunch today. And each of us has a different opinion. I want to go to McDonald's. Eva wants to go and get dumplings. Echo wants to go to pizza. Who knows, okay? But we all have these different opinions. In a democracy, we resolve this issue by having a debate. I make my argument for my idea, then you all make your argument for your ideas, okay? And then we vote, and then majority wins. Simple, right? Okay. A republic is different. A republic, you make your decisions based on tradition. So, for example, today is Thursday. And for whatever reason, we don't know why, but every Thursday we go out to get dumplings. So guess what? We just go and get dumplings. We don't ask why. We don't even know why. We may not even like dumplings. It doesn't matter. What matters is you respect and follow the tradition set by your fathers. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, what's interesting is these two systems have benefits and consequences. And it's the idea of the republic that allows Rome to eventually conquer the entire Mediterranean. And the reason why is the idea of a republic solves a problem that democracy cannot solve. It's the idea of citizenship and identity. The way you organize your society is basically through citizenship. Okay? Who gets to be a citizen? Who doesn't? In a democracy, it's actually very hard to be a citizen. Because if we are having a debate and competition, we don't want others coming into the system. Right? There's 4 of us in the classroom, we debate. But let's just say we let in 5 other people. And these 5 other people all love noodles. Guess what? We're stuck going to noodles every day. Right? So we don't want newcomers. And that's why the Athenian Empire fell. The Athenian Empire had to fight these wars to protect its empire, but in each battle, it had to lose soldiers. Even if you win battles, you have to lose soldiers. And it could not replenish these soldiers because it did not want foreigners to become citizens. Does that make sense? But in a republic, you do not have this problem, right? If we are a republic, and we're all stuck going to noodles every Thursday, we let in 100 people. Doesn't matter. We're all going to noodles, right? It doesn't affect us. So the beauty of a republic is you can allow immigrants and foreigners to come into your system, which allows you to replenish your military. And they become citizens if they are willing to fight for you and if they're willing to follow your traditions, your customs, your history. And it's very similar in America, right? In China, how are you a citizen? Well, you're born here, and both your parents are Chinese, and that's it, okay? There's no other way to become a Chinese citizen. But in America, you can immigrate and just say, I swear to obey the Constitution. I swear to protect the Constitution. If you say those words, you can become a U.S. citizen. Okay? So that's the power of the republic. Okay? So let's talk about some historical examples to illustrate the difference between a democracy and a republic. Well, in a democracy, people understand polis, or society, as a community of people. Okay? So the example is, in 480, the Persians invaded the Greek mainland, and they were about to attack Athens. And there was no way that Athens could withstand the Persian onslaught. So what did they do? Well, what they did was they got onto their ships and they sailed away. The entire Athenian people, the entire city of Athens, got onto the ships and sailed away. And the Persians were like, well, you can't do that. And the Athenians says, yes, we can. Because as a community, we can be wherever we want. We don't have to be in Athens. As long as we're a community, we will be Athens. We can leave Athens and go sail to Africa, and we will still be Athens. Okay? That's the idea of community. But the Romans didn't believe that. Okay? Remember, in 216, Hannibal comes and attacks the Italian peninsula. He destroys and wipes out all the Roman armies. Rome has no army. And at this point, Rome has options. It can surrender or it can leave. It cannot leave because to leave Rome would be to abandon its identity as a Roman people. If you're a republic, the place does matter. once you leave the place, you abandon the values, the culture, the history that makes you distinctly Roman. So the Romans said to Hannibal, we will not surrender. We will fight to the last man if you come and attack us. And Hannibal never did. Okay? And what's really funny about this incident is it's really the proudest moment in Roman history. Okay? They were up against impossible odds. They had no army. Hannibal was the greatest general in human history. He had a huge army. But the Roman people were willing to make all the necessary sacrifices in order to protect their identity and their values and their history. They refused to let Rome fall. So every person, whether it's woman, man, or child, would have taken arms and defended the city against Hannibal. And this was really the highlight of the Republican system. It refuses to surrender, because to surrender would mean abandoning its identity. Okay? So that's why Rome was able to defeat all its enemies, because the Roman idea of citizenship was flexible. If you're willing to fight for Rome, you could become a citizen. And as such, Rome was able to draw soldiers from all of the Italian peninsula. From 280 to 272 BCE, there's something called the Pyrrhic Wars. Pyrrhus, who was a Greek king, came to the aid of the Greek colonies in Italy. Okay? These Greeks were complaining and saying, the Romans are bullying us. Can someone please help us and build us a Greek empire? So Pyrrhus comes and attacks the Romans. And he won every battle. The Romans were terrible soldiers. He had the best soldiers in the world, and he was winning every battle. And at a certain point, Pyrrhus said, okay, we're killing a lot of Romans, but if I win one more battle, if I just win one more battle, I'm going to run out of soldiers. So he had to retreat. Okay? And this is because of the idea of citizenship. The Greeks could not replenish their forces, whereas the Romans could. Okay? And this is what allowed for social mobility and innovation in Rome. The fact that Rome was constantly fighting these battles, these wars, against everyone, and learning from their mistakes, and growing as a military power. Eventually, Rome comes in conflict with Carthage. And Carthage is, at this point, the greatest naval power of the Mediterranean. Rome did not have a navy. It doesn't know how to sail ships. Guess what it did? Guess what happened? They decided to build a navy. And they lost a lot of battles against Carthage, but again, because Rome was so persistent, because Rome was not afraid to lose soldiers, eventually it overwhelmed Carthage. Okay? So this is the reason why eventually Rome was able to conquer the entire Mediterranean world. No one could stop Rome. Okay? So by about 200 BCE, Rome was the greatest military hegemon of that time. And by 100 BC, 100 years later, it was an empire.